Hello, and welcome to our next Genesis teaching. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 45, a really great chapter, and it's going to bring all those typologies we've been looking at into a sharp relief and sharp focus here. So let's just jump right in and get right to it. So it says, Then Joseph could not refrain himself before them all that stood by him, and he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And so what we see here is this great conclusion to this typology, where we see that finally Joseph, who is a huge type of Christ throughout this whole narrative, every chapter you just see different levels and dimensions of how every single aspect of his life is an anticipatory prefigure or model of Jesus Christ himself. And we know that Joseph, as a type of Christ here in this narrative, he has already been married to his Gentile bride, Asenath. And so the 7-year famine is already underway, which is a typology of the 7 years of tribulation. And as you continue to look at that and examine that, you're going to see that every verse here in this whole chapter talks about how the Jews are going to start becoming believers in Christ as Messiah as early as 2 years into the 7-year tribulation. Now, not all of them are going to believe yet. However, we know that the 144,000 are definitely going to believe, and that's who is represented here. And you're going to see them in Revelation chapter 7. And you can make a speculation. This is a speculation, but I would speculate that after the seals, so if you want to go back to that at the end of chapter 6, when the 6th seal is opened, I have a speculation here that that is potentially 2 years into the tribulation. I know different people teach it differently, but I'm very big on the chronological language that's in Revelation. And so some people try to get around that, but it's very clear that it uses chronological language, meaning that the seals and the trumpets and the bowls are not in tandem with each other, but they are sequential. And so I know there's a debate about that, but I teach it that it's sequential. And so the seals happen first, and so some people make a big deal about this 6th seal being opened, and because what happens here, the heavens departed as a scroll, so some people think, oh, that's it, see, this is the time when the second coming's happening, but not so much. There's a lot of cross-references here where we could get into the fact that this is not actually the second coming, but this is simply a moment during the tribulation when there is this great upheaval and things are getting ready for the second half of the tribulation. And before that happens, there's going to be tribulation saints that have endured the first couple of years of the tribulation and all the terrors and wars and famine and pestilence and all the things that are going on. They're going to be, those who've been killed are going to find themselves in heaven. And the 144,000 are going to be protected. And so as they're going to be protected, and we see that in chapter 7, and there's different, breakdowns of how people interpret the timing here. and exactly what point you're at, but I would say, based on our typology of Genesis 45, it's possible that this is at the 2 year mark or within sometime during the second year of, or heading into the third year of the tribulation, simply because I believe that this recounting of the 144,000, which are sealed and they're protected, so that these particular Jews who receive Christ as Messiah are protected from any harm happening to them during the tribulation period. And so, if this 7 year period is indicative of the tribulation, which I believe it is in Genesis 45, then we're looking at the second year here is when Christ reveals himself. And the other interesting thing here is, of course, the first time they come to Joseph, they think he's an Egyptian. He seems to be speaking Egyptian, dressed in Egyptian clothes, associating with Egyptians. Basically, they think of him as a Gentile. Just like national Jews today, they might recognize that Christians believe in Jesus, who they kind of accept him, that he was a Jew, but they consider him to be this great embarrassment and this traitor and this false Messiah, and that his disciples stole the body away and he didn't really resurrect, and all the other things that they believe, national Israel, religious Israel, the things they believe about Christ, are borne out here in this narrative, because his brothers, they sold him into slavery. They left him for dead, but ended up selling him into slavery, and for all they know, they lied about him being dead immediately when they brought his coat to their father and said, "Is this your son's coat?" And so they misled him or deceived him about that. But the other interesting thing about that aspect of this is that we see very clearly that they, for all they know, he is dead by now, that he's died, and whoever they sold him to, he's gone, or they've forgotten about him. And so the idea of him being alive, remember when they threw him in the pit, we talked about that in the earlier chapter. It's a picture of Christ dying at his betrayer's hands. And so it's a picture of him dying, so when he actually comes up out of the pit, that's a picture of him being resurrected, but something that they don't really acknowledge or accept. And so, and of course, Jacob himself firmly believes that he is dead, and Jacob represents, in this narrative, the entirety of Judaism. He represents, of course, Jacob is Israel, and so he represents Israel. And so, as far as Israel is concerned, Joseph is dead. Joseph's a type of Christ, so as far as Israel is concerned, Jesus is dead. But here, they're going to find out otherwise, that no, Jesus is alive, and please keep in mind that he's already married, so just like Christ will already be married to the church at this time in the during the tribulation period. And so he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I, Joseph, doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Now, here, remember, Joseph is a type of Christ, but he's also a son of Israel. And so here, I'm going to suggest that he's not talking about typologically God the Father, because of course God the Father lives, always, eternal. However, when he's talking about his father here, I believe he's talking, typologically speaking, it represents the Jewish nation. It represents all of Israel. Does Israel yet live? In other words, are all of the of course, literally, on the surface level of this, he's talking about his actual father, his actual biological father, Jacob. But typologically speaking here, I believe that this represents, does Israel yet live? In other words, does the people that I came from yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I, Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And here, I want to break off from here and just look at Zechariah chapter 12, because we know there's going to come a time, as Zechariah 12 prophesies, where he says, And I will pour upon the house of David, and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and of supplications. And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. And they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. In that day there shall be great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadadrimmon in the valley of Megiddon. And the land shall mourn, every family apart, and the family of the house of David apart, and their wives apart, the family of the house of Nathan apart, and their wives apart, and the family of the house of Levi apart, and their wives apart, and the family of Shimei apart, and their wives apart, all the families that remain, every family apart, and their wives apart. Excuse me. So, as they're doing this, it's indicative or typologically connected to this passage where they are very troubled. They're mourning because they see, oh, here he is. He actually survived. Not only did he survive, he's actually the ruler over Egypt. But he tells them, Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. So now he's explaining to them, look, this was all part of the plan. God has ordained this, just like God ordained for Christ to be crucified, and to gather a bride, a Gentile bride for himself, the church, but ultimately is going to also restore and redeem Israel. Notice here, so this is where I got the 2 years. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in the which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So, this is important because God is also going to save Israel a posterity at the second coming, and throughout the tribulation actually, but especially at the second coming, he's going to save a posterity, and that posterity is going to be a huge part of what the people that repopulate the earth during the millennium. So let's look at Luke 13. So again, behold, your house is left unto you desolate, and verily I say unto you, ye shall not see me until the time come when you shall say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. So they are desolate, and they are going to be desolate in the tribulation, just like they're desolate in the famine here back in Egypt in their history, but they're ultimately going to be redeemed when they recognize him as Lord. And so notice that here he tells them, So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he hath made me a father to Pharaoh. In other words, he is Lord, and Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. And he then instructs them, Haste ye and go up to my father. Okay, so he's basically saying, go to my father. So in the natural, in the surface level historical account here, of course he means to go get Jacob and bring him. But In the greater sense, the typological sense here, it could be understood that he's saying, "Go up to my people Israel," and these are the representatives of Israel, the 12 tribes, the 144,000 in Revelation, and say unto him, or in the typological sense, them, "Thus saith thy son Joseph." Remember, Joseph means add to. "God hath made me Lord of all Egypt." In other words, Egypt represents the world. Christ is the Lord of the whole earth. "Come down unto me, tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children, and thy flocks and thy herds, and all that thou hast." Excuse me. So, keep in mind that it's true that during the tribulation, they're going to be in great distress, and we're going to look at that here in a minute as well. But the 144,000 are going to be protected. They are going to be fully and totally protected from all of the horrors that are happening, and they have that seal of protection, as Revelation chapter 7 shows. And then that same group, the 144,000, we see them again in Revelation 14, and suddenly they're taken up to heaven at that point, if you read that passage carefully. And so it's interesting, because if you think about that, Revelation 7, people are taken to heaven. Revelation 14, the 144,000 are taken to heaven. If you actually go and look at our website, riverrockrestoration.net, and you go to a Bible study section, you'll see that there's I don't have them on YouTube, but I have literally hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, audio recordings of all of our original sessions, all the way back to 2009. I recorded them on an old MP3 player, and for 2.5 years we taught through the whole book of Revelation. So if you want to go get our teachings on Revelation, you can go see it. And when we were going through that, it's kind of like a wedding. So if you look at Revelation from that perspective as a big wedding, you kind of see the people showing up, and the first person who's there, of course, is Christ. But then suddenly the church shows up in Revelation 4. Then in Revelation 7, the tribulation saints show up. They're kind of like the bridesmaids. The bride is already there. In Revelation 14, the groomsmen, if you will, the 144,000, show up in heaven. And so all these different groups of people are showing up in heaven at different times throughout the tribulation. The church first, and then all these other groups. And so a lot of people look at the rapture and they think, oh, well, there's just this one moment where everybody gets translated to heaven, and that's it. And they talk about pre, mid, or post, or all the different debates about that. And the interesting thing is, well, there are people who are taken to heaven before the tribulation starts. There's people who are taken to heaven during the tribulation, and then there's more people taken to heaven during the tribulation, depending on what group of people they are. And so if you really chart that out, it seems like there's multiple people that are, if I can say it this way, resurrected, raptured at different times. So some people have a multiple rapture theory, and I'm not sold on that one way or the other. Just reading the text, it appears that there's different groups of people that show up at different times throughout the tribulation, either before it, church, and then those who show up at different times throughout. Okay, so, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. Now, this is interesting, because if we look at, actually, let's look at Matthew 24 first. Notice Christ says, "For then shall be great tribulation." In other words, this is the second half of the second 3.5 years, the second half of the 7-year tribulation. "For then shall be great tribulation," second half of the tribulation, "such as was not seen since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. So in other words, he's saying no one would survive the last half of the tribulation if the days weren't cut short. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And so those people who are going to survive the tribulation in the natural, in the flesh, they are going to survive. This is how we know that people in the natural are going to survive the 7-year tribulation, because he says no flesh should be saved. So we know that flesh will be saved because those days will be cut short. Therefore, there will be people in non-resurrected bodies who survive the tribulation, who don't die and don't take the mark of the beast, and those people are going to be the people that actually repopulate the earth during the millennial reign of Christ. That's what that passage is telling us and teaching us. So, and behold, your eyes see in the eyes of my brother Benjamin that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. So this indicates that likely that it's indicating here that he's speaking in their language finally. He's speaking to them in Hebrew. And so the gospel, of course, has gone out in a very Gentile manner, into Gentile languages in Greek, and then later on into English, and translated into all these other different languages of Gentile peoples. But there is a lot more coming out now about the New Testament and the gospel in Hebrew for Jews, and so it's going to also come about at that time. As a matter of fact, this passage here of Revelation 11, we'll look at that in a second, but let's also look at the two witnesses. Okay, so this used to always trip me up, because the two witnesses, I was always wondering how in Matthew 24, I always wondered, well, it doesn't make sense, because if the Jews aren't going to believe until the halfway point of the tribulation, how are they going to be able to obey Jesus's how are they going to obey Jesus' commands in Matthew 24:15, when it says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them be within Judea flee into the mountains. And you have to do it right away. You have to do it immediately, as soon as you see it, or you're not gonna make it. Is the implication there. So, very interesting. As I was contemplating that contradiction, or what I thought was a contradiction, I thought, well, that can't work, because how are the Jews going to suddenly start listening to Jesus when they've rejected him right up until this halfway point of the tribulation? They're not going to have time to go and get a New Testament and read this Matthew 24 passage so that they can obey this instruction. And then the Lord finally revealed it to me. He's like, no. What do you think the two witnesses are going to be preaching for that 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation? And they're going to be passing out tracts. And what tracts are they going to be passing out? Matthew 24. They're going to be warning, okay, this was written. This is coming. When you see it, you're going to see this abomination. It's going to offend you. When you see it happen, you're going to know that Christ is your Messiah. You're going to know that this is what he told you to do. And so the two witnesses are going to be the ones who are witnessing Christ and witnessing Matthew 24 to the Jews who have yet to believe. So some Jews already believe, but not all of them. The 144,000 certainly already believe by this point, but not all the people of Israel. So just like in Matthew 40 or Genesis 45, notice. So not all of them believe at this point. Only the 12. Only the 12 believe. The 12 tribes, the 12 patriarchs of Israel. Because remember, in Canaan is the rest of them. They're back in Canaan, for instance, Jacob himself and all their wives and their children, and those Jews, don't believe yet because they haven't had the 144,000 tell them yet. So that's going to work out over that course of that next year and a half or so when they start, the 144,000 start evangelizing Israel. But the most stubborn Jews are not going to believe it until they see the abomination of desolation. That's when they're finally going to believe, and that's when they're going to flee. Okay, so, and of course we know they flee here in Revelation 12. So, so here it says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. So that's the 3.5 years where they flee to Petra. Okay, so we've already been over that. All right. And you shall tell my father, remember that's Jacob or Israel, you should tell Israel of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. In other words, bring down Israel hither, all, of course, literally Jacob, but typologically, everybody, all your wives and your children, you're going to go tell them, and you're going to bring down and come and join me here. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck. Now this is interesting because Benjamin, remember, is the youngest, so and wept. And so there's going to be very young Jews who are going through this time, who are the youngest of those who are going to be saved as part of Israel during this time. And moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. And the same thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beasts, and go, get you into the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Now, thou art commanded, This do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt, for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all them he gave each man charge of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver, and 5 changes of raiment. And so there's an interesting connection there. And to his father he sent after this manner 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. So God is going to provide for them during the tribulation. He's going to provide for them and make sure that they have all that they need. Of course, in this case, as they flee to Petra, remember Petra being the rock, the giant cliff face, the belief in Christ as Messiah, as Peter. Remember, you are Peter, but upon this Petra, I will build my church. This giant cliff face of Peter's testimony about Christ as Messiah. And so he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, See that ye fall not out by the way. And they went up out of Egypt, and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father, and told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. So remember that Joseph is a type of Christ, so if Christ is alive and he's the ruler over the world, that means he's been resurrected. And Jacob, of course, is Israel. And so initial shock and disbelief, and they told him all the words of Joseph, which he'd said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. Interesting statement, because spiritually they're going to be born again when they finally recognize and believe that Jesus is alive, that he really did resurrect, he really was their Messiah, and everything that he prophesied to them has come true and is coming true. And notice it says it changes it now. He changes his name from Jacob to Israel. And Israel said, not Jacob, Israel, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive." In other words, Jesus is resurrected. He believes in the resurrection, and now his name is Israel. So typically, even after he got his name changed, he usually goes by Jacob. And you can see that when he's in the flesh, oftentimes it'll call him Jacob, but when he's spiritual, it'll call him Israel. And so his spirit's revived here because he now believes that Joseph is alive, a typological picture of believing that Christ is resurrected and alive, and therefore is their Messiah. "My son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so, of course, in the natural, Joseph does have to die, and we will see that when we get to Genesis 49, and we'll see that, Jacob does have to die, but we'll see that, like I said, in Genesis chapter 49. We'll go through all of that, and how it relates to all kinds of interesting things at that point. We're almost done. We only have 5 more chapters, 46 through 50, so looking forward to finishing Genesis. There's still a lot of great stuff coming up in the next few chapters, but this typology is just amazing, where you see all the aspects of what Joseph is going through and his brothers, how they relate to the 144,000, how it relates to the tribulation, how it relates to Israel believing. That was our object lesson with our tract. If you noticed, this is a tract of showing the resurrection. And notice, if you go back to the beginning of the video, you'll notice that I had this covering the Star of David. In other words, they're in darkness right now, but they're about to see the light of Christ during the tribulation, where the menorah, picture of the church, was already visible, but now we have the Star of David. Israel is going to be connected also to the resurrection as soon as they believe and as soon as they say, "Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord." So, really cool stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's kind of a short one today, but pretty obvious of all the different typological underpinnings of this chapter and how they relate to the history of Joseph and everything that happened during that 7 years of famine that he prophesied through Pharaoh's dreams. And so, hope you again enjoyed this video and are enjoying this series. We're almost at the end of it. A few more to do, and then we'll see what the Lord wants us to do next. So maybe we'll keep going right to Exodus, possibly, at that point. So anyway, God bless you. We will see you here, there, in the air, or in the next video. God bless you.